Kill Bill. Volume 1 wasn't just Quentin Tarantino's martial arts revenge saga. It was a blood-soaked ballet that fused samurai cinema, spaghetti westerns, grindhouse exploitation, and Hong Kong action into one brutal masterpiece. But what audiences saw on screen was only half the story. Behind the camera, chaos erupted. Injuries, rewrites, near disasters, and artistic battles. Today, we're diving into 20 weird facts about Kill Bill. Volume 1 that revealed just how wild the production really was. Stick around for the bonus fact. It's one Tarantino secret fans rarely talk about. Let's slice into the truth. 1. The infamous Crazy 88 scene. Almost didn't happen. The House of Blue Leaves showdown, Uma Thurman versus the Crazy 88, is the film's bloody crown jewel. But what audiences didn't know is that the entire sequence was nearly cut due to budget concerns. Tarantino's original script had an even longer version, with multiple duels and character backstories. Miramax executives panicked over the cost. 300 extras, gallons of fake blood, and weeks of fight choreography. Tarantino refused to back down, telling producers, "This isn't just a fight. It's cinema history." To save money, he shot portions in black and white, cleverly hiding excessive gore from censors while still delivering spectacle. Not a compromise, but a stylistic choice that gave the sequence its iconic grindhouse edge. The gamble paid off. The Crazy 88 scene became one of the most unforgettable fight sequences in modern cinema, proving Tarantino right when he insisted, "It's not violence, it's choreography." 2. Uma Thurman nearly died in a car crash on set. Uma Thurman's commitment to the bride came at a devastating price. During filming in Mexico, Tarantino pushed her to drive a stunt car herself down a narrow dirt road for a high-speed shot. Thurman expressed fear, but Tarantino insisted it was safe. The car malfunctioned, slamming her into a tree. She suffered permanent injuries to her neck and knees. For years, she kept silent, but later revealed she felt betrayed. She told the New York Times, "Quentin and I had a terrible fight. It was criminal negligence." Tarantino admitted regret, calling it his biggest mistake as a director. What audiences didn't see was the fractured trust behind the bride's vengeance. That one reckless decision left scars deeper than any sword wound on screen, and it almost robbed the film of its leading star. 3. Tarantino waited a decade for the right bride. Tarantino conceived Kill Bill in the mid-1990s, imagining Uma Thurman as the lead from the start. But instead of rushing production, he waited nearly a decade until Thurman was ready. At one point, he even considered casting another actress, but admitted, "There's no bride without Uma." Ironically, when filming finally began, Thurman was recovering from pregnancy, and her body was still healing. Tarantino rewrote fight scenes around her condition, postponing intense stunts until later in the shoot. It wasn't just loyalty, it was obsession. For Tarantino, the film wasn't about finding an actress to fit the role, but building the role around his muse. What audiences didn't know is that every sword swing, every drop of blood, every moment of the bride's fury was born from a director's long patience and an actress's reluctant return to hell. 4. Sonny Chiba's casting was a full-circle tribute. When legendary martial artist Sonny Chiba appeared as swordsmith Hattori Hanzo, it wasn't just fan service. It was Tarantino's cinematic love letter. As a teenager, Tarantino obsessively watched Chiba's Street Fighter films, studying their raw brutality. He once confessed, "Without Sonny Chiba, I wouldn't be Quentin Tarantino." Casting Chiba as the swordmaker gave the film a spiritual authenticity, linking grindhouse 1970s cinema with Hollywood spectacle. But the real twist? Chiba's dialogue about forging the greatest sword ever wasn't just scripted. It echoed real samurai sword legends. On set, crew members claimed Tarantino treated Chiba with reverence, bowing before him. For audiences, Hanzo was a character. For Tarantino, he was the soul of the film. The casting wasn't about nostalgia. It was about closing a cinematic circle that began decades earlier in a video rental store. 5. The blood was inspired by old kung fu tricks. The geysers of blood in Kill Bill weren't accidents. They were deliberate homages to 1970s martial arts cinema. Instead of modern CGI, Tarantino demanded old-school practical effects. Special effects teams used pressurized pumps, hidden tubing, and literal buckets of stage blood. The crew often had to mop up between takes because the set turned into a swimming pool of red. At one point, production ran out of fake blood and had to rush orders for more, over 450 gallons in total. The exaggerated spray was inspired by Japanese chambara films, where blood was symbolic, not realistic. Tarantino wanted audiences to feel like they were watching a fever dream, not a crime scene. It wasn't gore for shock. It was violence as surreal poetry. Every gush of red was a cinematic wink, reminding viewers, this is art, not reality. 6. The bride's yellow jumpsuit was a Bruce Lee resurrection. When Uma Thurman slips into the yellow jumpsuit for the House of Blue Leaves battle, it isn't just a costume choice, it's cinematic resurrection. The outfit directly mirrors Bruce Lee's tracksuit from Game of Death, 1978, a film he never finished before his death. Tarantino wanted the visual to scream lineage, from Bruce Lee's fists to the bride's katana. But there was more than homage at work. Costume designer Catherine Marie Thomas revealed that the jumpsuit had to be customized for brutal stunt work, reinforced at the seams because Thurman's movements shredded the early versions. Every blood splatter that stains that yellow fabric became a kind of rebirth, a woman avenging her past in the colors of a legend who never got to finish his own fight. It wasn't just cosplay. It was cinematic reincarnation. 7. The Snow Garden duel nearly destroyed the crew. The climactic duel between the bride and O-Ren Ishii in the Snow Garden looked serene on screen, but behind the camera, it was hell. Tarantino insisted on building the Snow Garden indoors, complete with falling snow made of potato flakes. Under the hot studio lights, the flakes stuck to costumes, clogged equipment, and even choked actors mid-fight. Crew members recalled slipping on the floor as if it were ice, making the swordplay genuinely dangerous. Liu later said the fight felt like dancing on a knife's edge, but Tarantino refused to compromise. If we shoot outside, it won't feel dreamlike. It has to feel unreal. What audiences didn't know is that every graceful step in that duel was backed by near disaster. The snow wasn't just scenery. It was a silent enemy that almost buried the scene. 8. The anime sequence saved the film's pacing one of Kill Bill. Volume. One's most shocking turns is the anime sequence detailing O-Ren Ishii's childhood. But it wasn't just an artistic flourish. It was a production rescue. Tarantino had originally scripted a live-action flashback, but the runtime ballooned. Instead of cutting it, he turned to Japanese animation studio Production IG, the minds behind Ghost in the Shell. In animation, they could compress an epic backstory into 10 surreal minutes. The violence could also be more extreme, free from ratings board scrutiny. Tarantino later admitted, if it wasn't anime, the movie would have drowned. What audiences didn't know is that the animated blood and shadows weren't a stylistic indulgence. They were survival. That sequence kept the narrative flowing, turned a villain into a tragic figure, and gave the film one of its most unforgettable textures. 9. Gordon Liu played 2 roles, without most people realizing. Sharp-eyed fans may notice Gordon Liu twice in the Kill Bill saga, but in volume 1, he's already pulling double duty. Liu, a martial arts cinema legend, played Johnny Mo, leader of the Crazy 88s, but Tarantino secretly cast him again as Pai Mei, the white-bearded kung fu master who appears in volume 2. For audiences who didn't grow up on Shaw Brothers classics, the connection slipped by. Tarantino reveled in the stunt, calling it his private kung fu Easter egg. On set, Liu's presence was revered. Actors often bowed to him before takes. Not a cameo, but a symbolic bridge. Old-school Hong Kong cinema bleeding into Hollywood. What audiences didn't know is that one actor embodied both chaos and wisdom, villain and teacher, in the same saga. It was a hidden doubling that gave the film mythic weight. 10. The soundtrack was pieced together like a mixtape. When you think of Kill Bill, you hear the siren wail before the bride strikes. That wasn't random. It was Tarantino's obsession with mixtape filmmaking. He didn't hire a traditional composer. Instead, he scavenged obscure vinyl, spaghetti western scores, Japanese surf rock, and even TV themes. RZA from Wu-Tang Clan helped stitch it together, layering sound effects like scratches in a hip-hop track. Tarantino once said, "I direct movies like I make mixtapes." The result? A soundtrack that feels alive, unpredictable, and lethal. Not a score, but a weapon. What audiences didn't know is that every needle drop was a duel in itself, chosen for rhythm, irony, or shock. It turned fight scenes into ballets, and silences into threats. And before we slice into fact number 11, go ahead and like and subscribe, because just like the bride's katana, this story only gets sharper from here. 11. The 5-point palm exploding heart technique was a last-minute addition. One of the saga's most legendary elements, the 5-point palm exploding heart technique, wasn't even in the early drafts of Kill Bill. Tarantino added it late in production, inspired by old Shaw Brothers kung fu tropes where mystical techniques bordered on supernatural. Uma Thurman initially thought it was too campy, but Tarantino convinced her. This is myth. This is legend. It's supposed to be unbelievable. Choreographers scrambled to design movements that looked both simple and lethal. What audiences didn't know is that the move was shot with almost no rehearsal, relying on Thurman's natural presence to sell it. That tap 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 moment became the saga's exclamation point. Death delivered not with a sword, but a touch. Not realism, but pure cinematic poetry. And it all came from a last-minute flash of inspiration. 12. Michael Madsen almost didn't return. As Bud Michael Madsen, who played Bud, was Tarantino's old collaborator from Reservoir Dogs. But he almost didn't sign on. At the time, Madsen was struggling with personal issues and felt he couldn't handle a physically demanding role. Tarantino begged him, saying, "I can't finish Kill Bill without you." Madsen reluctantly agreed, but insisted on rewriting Bud as a washed-up, broken cowboy, rather than a slick killer. He wasn't acting. He was surviving. Tarantino embraced it, turning Bud into the saga's tragic counterpoint. A man who already lost before the bride even found him. Not a character, but a confession. That's why Bud's death by snakebite feels so bitterly authentic. 13. Tarantino used real Japanese Yakuza advisors. The authenticity of the Tokyo underworld scenes wasn't just from imagination. Tarantino brought in advisors who had real-world knowledge of Japanese gang culture. While not openly acknowledging them as Yakuza, production insiders hinted they were men who had lived that life. They guided wardrobe choices, mannerisms, and even how bodyguards held their weapons. Lucy Liu admitted she was intimidated, saying, "They looked like they could kill you with a stare." What audiences didn't know is that O-Ren Ishii's icy authority wasn't just acting, it was built on the mannerisms of real gangsters. Even the etiquette in the House of Blue Leaves mirrored Yakuza-style respect rituals. Not just style, but lived menace. Tarantino didn't just make a gangster film, he flirted with the real thing, blurring the line between homage and dangerous authenticity. 14. Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah's rivalry was real. The Bride vs. Elle Driver wasn't just scripted hostility, it spilled over behind the camera. Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah reportedly clashed during production. Crew members recalled icy silences and subtle jabs. The eye patch fight in the trailer became an outlet for that tension. Stunt coordinators later revealed the actresses went harder than rehearsed, their swords striking with real force. Hannah admitted later, "It was cathartic. I hated her. She hated me." What audiences didn't know is that the savage energy wasn't entirely choreographed. It was two women channeling genuine animosity into performance. Not a staged brawl, but a duel of egos. That's why the fight feels so raw, so vicious. It wasn't just the bride fighting Elle, it was Uma fighting Daryl, and both determined to leave scars. 15. The film was originally one epic, not two. Kill Bill wasn't supposed to be split into Volume 1 and Volume 2. Tarantino wrote and shot it as a single 4-hour epic. But after early screenings, Miramax demanded a cut. Harvey Weinstein pushed for trimming, but Tarantino refused to butcher his vision. Instead, he proposed a split. 2 films, 2 tones. Volume 1 would be the wild, bloody rampage. Volume 2, the slower, meditative conclusion. What audiences didn't know is that the decision saved the movie from being hacked apart in the editing room. Thurman later said, "We didn't make 2 movies. We made 1 movie cut in half. That's why the tonal shift between volumes feels so deliberate. It wasn't compromise. It was preservation. Not defeat, but defiance." The Bride's vengeance survived because the story was allowed to breathe in 2 acts. 16. The Bride's katana was a functional weapon. Most Hollywood swords are props. Rubber or aluminum. Not in Kill Bill. The Bride's Hattori Hanzo sword was forged from steel, fully functional and razor-sharp. Tarantino insisted on authenticity, saying, "If she's holding the world's greatest sword, it has to feel like the world's greatest sword." Uma Thurman trained for months in sword handling, cutting through bamboo and tatami mats. Crew members recall moments where the blade came dangerously close to stunt performers. At one point, Thurman accidentally sliced through a wooden set piece, leaving everyone stunned at its sharpness. What audiences didn't know is that the katana wasn't just a symbol, it was a lethal instrument, treated with reverence between takes. Not just a prop, but a character in its own right. Every swing on screen carried the weight and the danger of a real weapon. 17th, Tarantino hid homages in camera angles. Tarantino didn't just reference old films through costumes and music. He wove them into the very angles of his shots. The bride's showdown with O-Ren echoes Akira Kurosawa's framing from Sanjuro. The slow zoom on Ella Driver in the hospital corridor mirrors Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill. Even the opening close-up of Thurman's bloodied face recalls Sergio Leone's spaghetti western standoffs. Tarantino admitted, "I'm not stealing. I'm honoring. Cinema is a language." And I'm quoting. What audiences didn't know is that every frame was built like a cinematic collage, a scrapbook of world cinema stitched into one revenge story. Not plagiarism, but resurrection. The angles weren't random. They were deliberate winks to the films that shaped Tarantino's DNA, hidden beneath the carnage. For those who recognize them, Kill Bill becomes a secret dialogue across decades of cinema. 18. Lucy Liu's casting faced backlash. When Tarantino cast Lucy Liu as O-Ren Ishii, some critics accused him of typecasting an Asian actress into a martial arts role. But what they didn't know is that Tarantino originally envisioned O-Ren as a white woman. After seeing Liu's performance in Shanghai Noon and Charlie's Angels, he rewrote the character entirely, tailoring her rise from half-Chinese, half-Japanese orphan to Yakuza boss. Liu later said, "Quentin didn't want me to fit the part. He wanted to rewrite the part to fit me." On set, she delivered ferocity that stunned the cast, especially in her decapitation of boss Tanaka. Liu didn't just play O-Ren, she redefined the archetype of the female gangster. What audiences didn't know is that without Liu's presence, O-Ren might have been forgettable. With her, she became iconic. 19. The film's editing. Nearly broke. Sally Menke, Tarantino's longtime editor, Sally Menke, faced one of her hardest jobs with Kill Bill. The dailies piled up, hundreds of hours of fight choreography, dialogue in multiple languages, and endless takes. Menke reportedly worked in isolation for months, piecing together scenes like a puzzle. Tarantino would film alternate versions of fights with different tempos, forcing her to stitch them into a coherent rhythm. Crew members recalled her muttering, "This is 3 films, not 1." What audiences didn't know is that Menke essentially invented the pacing of Kill Bill. Every pause before a sword strike, every silence that stretches into tension. It was her invisible hand. Not just editing, but conducting. Tarantino later admitted, "Kill Bill is Sally's symphony. Behind the bride's fury was a woman in a dark room, sculpting chaos into elegance." 20th. The film sparked a global revival of martial arts cinema. When Kill Bill Volume 1 hit theaters in 2003, it didn't just entertain, it resurrected an entire genre. Asian martial arts films suddenly flooded Western distribution, from restored Shaw Brothers classics to modern imports like Hero and Ong Bak. DVD sales of obscure kung fu films skyrocketed. Directors like Zhang Yimou credited Tarantino with reintroducing their cinema to Western audiences. What audiences didn't know is that Kill Bill became a bridge between East and West, rewriting Hollywood's appetite for global action. It wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural detonation. The sight of Uma Thurman wielding a katana opened the floodgates for martial arts appreciation in the mainstream. Not homage, but resurrection. In one blood-soaked swing, Tarantino gave forgotten masters new life and proved violence could be art on a global scale. Bonus fact: Uma Thurman's daughter appears in the film's legacy. The most surprising twist didn't happen during filming, but years later. Uma Thurman's daughter, Maya Hawke, who grew up visiting the Kill Bill set, later became a breakout star in her own right with Stranger Things. Tarantino has hinted that if he ever makes Kill Bill Volume 3, it could follow the bride's daughter, BB. The sword might pass from mother to daughter. making art and life blur in ways even Tarantino couldn't have scripted back in 2003. Kill Bill. Volume 1 wasn't just a revenge movie. It was a fractured symphony of cinema history, stitched together with swords, scars, and gallons of stage blood. Behind every frame, chaos raged. Real injuries, rivalries, creative obsessions, and near disasters. Yet out of that turmoil came a film that changed global cinema, resurrected martial arts on the big screen, and gave the world a heroine unlike any before. The bride wasn't just fighting her enemies, she was fighting for cinematic memory itself. And that's why Kill Bill still slices through pop culture 2 decades later. It isn't just watched. It's studied, quoted, worshipped. So if you love these hidden truths, don't leave your limbs behind. Hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes revelations. And remember, in the world of cinema, revenge isn't just sweet, it's legendary.